know, COVID shots and out here, and why would you spend all your time in the house at home?
Have a chance to visit the science that I've been seeing.
Okay, I'll be here in a sec.
I'm going to come down for that presentation.
As soon as
No, you're good. I'm not actually.
as soon as Bill gets back, we're gonna go.
Just let you know that
You want us to stand when we talk or sit?
I don't know, Tony. Much think should we stand so we can project better?
I think so. I thought, oh yeah, I guess we didn't. I assumed we'd just come up to the podium when you were speaking.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah, yeah.
They want
We're very, I don't know how
to be
you guys
here
are,
so
but
we
I'm
can
very
project.
relaxed and
Stand
all
up.
that stuff. You know, I am not too rigid about anything. So
Okay, that's good.
as soon as Bill gets back, yeah, you're right.
Here it comes.
He, like I, moves slowly.
What's that?
He moves slowly.
Yeah,
He's got
we
a
all
big
do.
bad knee.
Oh, is he? Oh, yeah. Don't trip over this cord. Do me a favor.
Thanks.
Oh, that would be not good.
Sure, we're recording.
Yep, we are. Are we good, Caitlin? Are we good? Oh, great.
All right.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. What a crowd, guys. Thanks for showing up. My name is Tony Barger. I'm the archivist here at the Putnam County Public Library. And honestly, thank you so much for showing up today. And welcome to our celebration of Putnam County's 200th anniversary. And by the way, we have several free chairs up here for anyone in the back. And how we decided to celebrate our 200th anniversary is we thought we would focus on we thought we'd focus on the legacy of IBM. As I told many people, I don't think you can write a history of Putnam County without talking about IBM. And we're going to be doing that today by hearing from those that were there and those that were community leaders during that time. But before we get started, I do have some people and some people to thank. This event was sponsored by the Putnam County Public Library. So thanks to my director for helping me with this. The Heritage Preservation Society of Putnam County, Main Street Greencastle, and the Putnam County Visitors Bureau. Again, thanks a lot, guys. And also I have to thank my staff, Nola Zimmerman, Bill Kackelmeyer, and Diana Brumfield for their assistance getting this going and their patience with me. I've not been the easiest person to get along with for the past week. And even my wife said something, like poor Nola. And most of all, I wanted to thank Caitlin Tipsword. She's a staff person here. She's done a ton of the heavy lifting, getting this out, getting the word out, and just helping me with everything. So thanks, Caitlin. And what else do we have here? Oh, do we have, I know we do. Who are the IBMers here today?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was telling a gentleman back there, every time I meet an IBMer, for some reason, I want to say thank you for your service. I don't know.
Good line.
So anyway, thank you guys for showing up today. I think it's half the crowd. And what else? I won't even really give a short history of IBM. You guys know it. We broke ground in '54, and they left abruptly in 1987. I'll use that word abruptly. And there's just a lot of history packed in those decades in between, isn't there? And today we have someone that was a banker during this time and a community leader, Bill Marley. Thanks, Bill, for being here today. Over here we have Duane Kelly. I'm reading this verbatim, so I'm going back and forth. Duane Kelly, he's an IBMer, and thanks, Duane. Duane actually, man, I may be making this up. I felt like he came into the library like 6 times telling me I need to do this. And my wife's like, oh, I got to talk about my wife a lot. She's like, oh, you've been wanting to do this for years. I'm like, oh, I have, but it was Duane that made it happen. He kind of kicked me in the rear to make me do it. And then we have a county councilman, Bob Evans. Thanks, Bob, for being here. I just met Bob today. And then one of my favorites, researchers of this whole department, we have Mike Harmless. Thanks a lot, Mike, for being here today. A former mayor of Greencastle, mayor during that period of time when IBM left. And also, I'll just say that we also have to thank Mike because he coordinated getting these guys together, rounding them up for me, as well as he did a lot of the research. If not, why am I saying a lot? He did all the research for we're going to have a self-walking tour of brochures. Would you have on your chairs? Mike did all the research for that. So, and that was extensive. So one last thing before we get going. After this event, we're going to have photocopies of photographs that we have. If you guys don't know this, we have thousands of IBM photographs here in our archive. And we thought we'd have a period of time where you can set and identify the photographs. And they'll look like this, and you're right on it and identify. You can just write directly on the photograph. But I'll explain all that later after this presentation. So anyway, further ado, I'll give the floor to Mike.
Great. Thanks, Tony. So I'm going to be more of a moderator today because I really want to hear what these guys have to say. I'll just start with when we got together and had coffee at Starbucks. We were there an hour and a half, and we were laughing and crying and hearing all the stories and everything that we reflected on. And it was just absolutely just a great gathering. And I think these three guys will really give a good recollection of IBM and Greencastle and so on. So I was born here. I was raised here. I always, when I was growing up, IBM was here. IBM was here when I was in first grade. They were here when I graduated from high school, and they were always a huge part of the city and the county. And I think one of the things we'll start with is we'll have Bob Evans, obviously has lived here his entire life so far. And he has wonderful reflections about before IBM, when IBM came, the changes that occurred in the city because IBM came, and he has wonderful stories. So without further ado, let's have Bob Evans share.
Thank you, Mike. How did IBM happen to come to Greencastle? It's all basically folklore, but my father, who came here in 1921, told me that there was a young man who was a DePaul graduate by the name of Bernard Kilgore. He was from Albany, Indiana, which is up near Fort Wayne, South Fort Wayne, little town, 2,000 population. He ended up at DePaul, graduated in 1929. And Barney went on from here to be hired by the Dow Jones Corporation and became the managing editor, I believe, of the Wall Street Journal. And when he took over, the circulation was 33,000. By the time he gave it up, it was well over 1 million. Quite a guy. And the story that I got, it, as I say, falls in the category of folklore, was that Barney was a friend in New York with Tom Watson Sr. And one day they were either having cocktails or out on a golf course or whatever, I don't know. And Barney said, "Tom, you ought to bring a plant to Greencastle, Indiana." And Tom did.
There you go.
Believe it or not. In the early days, now I was not here when IBM came. I was off at school, just a kid. And, but I do remember that once they came, and this again is hearsay, but there was nothing in Greencastle in the way of housing, north and east, where Hillcrest is and the observatory, that area around that. There was nothing there. And there was a retired coach from DePaul by the name of Hal Hickman. And Hal made an arrangement with National Homes in Lafayette to build houses. And that's Hillcrest now. And they just built them one right after another. And the employees were lined up, as I was told, at an office down across from the inn at DePaul. And there was a realtor. Well, she wasn't a realtor. It was a realtors association, wasn't even active then. But she was a real estate agent, and she was selling the houses for Hal. And my father told me that she had IBM people, employees, lined up around the block. And she was just selling one house after another. So I guess that would be my take on the introduction of IBM to Greencastle. I got more I can tell later.
Yeah, a quick question though.
Sure.
So Windy Hill Country Club, I have heard kind of came about because IBM came here and they had a lot of golfers and.
I would think that was correct. I can't verify that, but yeah, it makes sense because the incomes were there to support the club. And you're right, golfers.
Yeah.
And IBM would bring people into the community from other facilities so that they homogenized us. We weren't all Putnamese.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, why don't we go now and full disclosure, Dwayne's my cousin. So I mean, we got to throw that out there. We're both Judy's. But anyway, so I've known Dwayne, you know, when we were out at the Judy farm, I don't know, what, 70 years, 60 years. Anyway, but Dwayne.
Long time.
Yeah. So Dwayne has great stories to tell about when he applied for IBM and stories about the IBM club and so on. So Dwayne, let's hear from you, please.
First, I start out by saying, I'm not sure how I got up here, but I did talk to Tony about it, and I gave Tony some names of some people that I thought would be good presentators. And the next thing I know, I get a call from my cousin and said, you're on the panel. So anyway, my start with IBM, my tried to be start with IBM was in 1950, either 3 or 4. I don't remember what year it was, but I came to Greencastle. They were taking applications across from the Dairy Castle in that old building that's set there on the point where the liquor store is now. I went in and they asked me what I was there for. And I said, I'm here to fill out an application for a job. And they said, where do you live? And I said, I live just a mile up in Montgomery County. We're only taking applications from people out of Putnam County, so we won't take your application. Well, that's pretty short history of that part of it. But I went ahead and worked in Indianapolis and went to Donnelly's at Crawfordsville. And in spring of 1966, a real good friend of mine, which most of you probably know, Robert Clodfelder, who is one of our people that passed away. I'd known him all my life. We played basketball against each other. I lived in Russellville. He lived just outside of Russellville. And he came to me and said, don't you do maintenance on the printing presses up at Donnelly's? And I said, yep, that's what I'm doing. He said, well, IBM needs somebody with printing press experience. So why don't you go down and put your application in? And I said, well, I tried that one time. But I did. I came down, put an application in, interviewed, and they offered me a job. I talked to them and I said, well, the job was second shift, naturally. And I said, well, how long will I be on second shift? Who knows? It's a seniority situation, it may be 2 years, it may be 20 years, who knows? So I turned the job down because I was rotating shifts at Donnelly. We rotated every 3 months. So then in the fall of 1966, I received a letter from IBM asking me to come in for another interview, which I did. And I started work in October of 1966 for IBM. So that's, and I'm sure each one of you have an own personal, everybody's story would be similar, but the same, but different. So then I started working second shift, worked second shift for a while, volunteered to go on third shift so I could see my kids in school. And then started in 1972, I believe it was, we started talking about bringing the mag media equipment in from Bowler. So I started making trips to Bowler to learn the equipment and help get the equipment ready to be shipped in. I spent 3 months one summer in Boulder getting equipment ready and getting some maintenance stuff documented and so forth. I came back when was elected to the IBM club president. And if you remember in the 70s, we were, gasoline wasn't high, there just wasn't any. Didn't make any difference how much money you had, gasoline was a shortage. So the IBM club always had a picnic. And we'd been local things. We had a camping club at that time, and somebody said, why don't we go to Kings Island? I said, well, that's a pretty good project, you know. So as club president, I had a liaison that worked between me and IBM and Maryland, York. And so I went to Maryland and I said, we were looking about trying to go to Kings Island for the IBM club picnic. Well, you can't do that. That's too far away. Gas is too high. You can't do that. She said, I said, well, are you the last say on this? Well, no, Bill Long would be plant manager, would have the last say. And I said, well, then do you make me an appointment with him or do I make my own? And she said, no, I'll set it up. So she set it up and I went and talked to Bill Long. And Bill said, well, what do you think the problem would be if there was any? I said, well, I can tell you right now, I don't have enough money in my budget to go to Kings Island. That's the problem to start with. He said, do you think you'll have a good turnout? I said, I believe so, yes. He said, you go ahead and set it up. He said, if you run out of money, you come see me. We went to Kings Island, had a good time. I ran out of money. I went to see Bill Long and he said, no problem, I'll cover it. Good job. So that was our trip to Kings Island. In 1976, I think it was, we started looking about having a credit union. Most of the other sites had credit unions, we didn't have. So we started going to Lexington and dealing with them, and they gave us seed money to start a credit union. In 1978, I became president of the credit union board and was president of the credit union board until the plant moved or the plant closed. I needed to go someplace. I needed 5 more years to have enough time to retire. So I went to mechanic. Well, with the job that I had, I knew I was going to Mechanicsburg because that was the only job that lined up with my job description. So we went to Mechanicsburg. And I will say, I see people in there that I know went to Mechanicsburg. My experience was it was a completely different atmosphere than what we had here at Greencastle. The people weren't, and maybe it was because we sort of came in and took some of their jobs, or I don't know, they were not real friendly. The people that I worked with in maintenance and in engineering departments when I was there were great people to work with. Most of them had been CEs in the field and had come into the plant to get out of the field. So they had exposure more than just in the site at Mechanicsburg. So I stayed there till they offered another buyout in 1992, and was told that that would be the last buyout. If you didn't take that, there wouldn't be any more. So I said, well, I think it's time for me to take a buyout. They did offer a buyout the next year. I could have went one more year, but my wife had a good job that she really enjoyed. So I retired in 92. We came back to Putnam County in 2000, moved into a house out on Heritage Lake in January the 1st of 2000. I think that's enough. My wife tells me I talk too much. I've probably done it again.
No, I don't think so. Why don't you talk just a little bit about your impression of how IBM treated their employees?
I think that's sort of like preaching to the choir, because I think everybody here, we all had a bad experience, employment or two, something happened, but I think generally, I think we would all agree that we worked for IBM in IBM's golden years. The IBM that's out there now is not the IBM that we worked for, by far. It was a good company. They were very respectful of their employees. I can tell you another little story. In 1976, I'd been with IBM 10 years. I had been saving vacation, and we took a 6-month tour out west, a 6-week tour out west, not month, 6-week tour out west. When we left, I said, I'm not going to shave for 6 weeks. When I came back, everybody said, you'll have to shave that beard. IBM will not let you have a beard. There was never one word said about my beard. So, and that was about the time that I think some of the things were starting to loosen up as far as IBM. They backed off on having to fly in a suit. You had to have a jacket and so forth, but you didn't have to have a necktie on. And you didn't have to have a suit, and things started, backing off a little bit in as far as the formality of the employment. But I think we all agree, I think, that we did work in the golden years of IBM and what you read now. And if there's an IBM Facebook page of IBM retirees, I get on it and read, but I don't do anything else with it. But if you read a lot of the posts on there now, some of the people that are just recently retiring or just retired in the last 10, 12 years, it's a complete different situation out there as far as IBM employment is concerned. You think that's windy enough?
No, you're good. We'll come back to you. So I think part of the reflection that I have is, again, that I grew up with all these IBMers kids in our school system. And so, we had in high school, we had great athletic teams. Why? Because we had all these IBM kids that were in the schools. I don't know if you all remember Raymond Churchill. Okay, all state in football. Well, Raymond's mom worked at IBM. I think you look at Mark Elliott, who many of you know, Phil P.D. Elliott, and Mark obviously went on and had a great career with IBM. Mark was on that football team, So we won the WIC in football and track that year. And was all these IBM and DePaul kids that were in the school system. So, my view about the impact that IBM had on our community is dramatic. I mean, we were so fortunate that Barney Kilgore asked Tom Watson to build a plant in Greencastle. It just absolutely changed the community. So, I have so many fond memories. And as a 6-year-old, and then at Miller School, and all the kids that were coming in and out as IBM would transfer folks in and out, we'd meet them. And I guess at the time, it was the first time I'd heard IBM stood for I've been moved. I hadn't heard that until then. And it kind of is like the Army, having been in the military. IBM was pretty strict in the 60s and so on, and then it began to loosen up. So let's talk just a little bit now. Let's bring Bill Marley up. Bill was very involved, obviously, in the community as a banker. He had been at DePaul, but very active as a community leader, and then helped with this transition when we got the news that IBM would be leaving. And Bill was a big part of all of that activity. And I'd like to hear his reflection.
Thank you. Takes me a lot longer to get up these days. Once you sit there for a while. Well, thank you, Mike. My family and I came to Greencastle, moved to Greencastle in 1967. And at that time, I thought IBM had been here forever. I didn't know the history of IBM at all. And we've had a very pleasant experience in Greencastle, Indiana for, 55 years, I guess we've lived here. I thought we'd play a little game here. You've said and just listened. I'd like to play a little game of, there's no prizes, no money. So our community has changed, and change happens. Change happens. And it's a matter of how do we reflect? What do we do with change? You can do a couple of things. You can ignore it, or you can build on that change. And our community has changed. I'd like to know who remembers what businesses we no longer have around the courthouse square or the environs. What's not there? Bill Dory, yell it out.
Cannons, Max, Pennies, Sears, Western Auto, let's see,
Montgomery and Ward.
Three Roads.
Conrad Stop and Shop.
Conrad Stop and Shop.
Standard Groceries,
Yep.
Shack Hall Theater.
Boncastle.
Two theaters. We had two movies. Yeah.
Rexall.
And three, Von Nassau. Oh, and Billy Gone.
How many drugstores did we have?
The biggest thing I noticed was a Zinc Mill.
We had 3 drugstores, I know.
Remember Yankees? It was a billiard club over on the west side where you walk down the stairs.
Okay. Yeah. You remember Russell's Furniture on the north side? RUSSEL, Russell's. Prevost, nobody's mentioned Prevost.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear you, Susie. I'm sorry. Apologies.
Ford Automotive.
Yes. We had a shoe store, Jones Shoe Store.
At the Bootery.
Yeah. Business officer.
Was that the name of it?
Well, the Bootery was owned by Merle Troyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, we had a tavern on the north side of the square. What was that?
I wouldn't know anything about that.
What?
What else? I think we've named a lot of them. We had a 5 and dime. Did anybody? Well, commercial hotel.
Yeah.
Murphy's.
Studebaker dealer.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Jency's dad.
Well, actually,
Jency Bingham's dad.
Well, I
actually, at one time where Adler's was, that was a feed store when I was about this
oh
tall.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had on cattle feed right out the front door.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I kind of build what I'm just going to say around our reactions to change. The community's response to that IBM closing. I don't blame IBM for our changes because change happens. Change is going to happen. And how did we react to that change? Well, fortunately, when the closing was announced, we as a community had begun to think about adding businesses or industry or whatever. In the past, the mayor would get a call from the state about a prospect coming to Indiana, and perhaps Greencastle might be something they could look at. The mayor either handled that or would call one of the local leaders and say, I need help. We're going to take them on a tour and so forth. It was very haphazard, I would say, because we were not organized. We didn't know what our employment might be, how many people we might have to fill a job. Not a very good history of promoting new businesses, new industries coming to Greencastle. So we had started just, fortunately, a little group, I guess we call it a development center, no building or anything. Just prior to closing, we had started this group. We had about 8 or 10 members, local leaders in the community. And when that IBM closing was announced, we started meeting every morning. Dave Murray from DePaul at the time was our leader. The mayor was part of it. We had some business leaders. IBM loaned us, I don't know how that happened or who paid, but Dick Andis, you remember the name Dick Andis, you IBMers, they loaned us him to help with this committee in terms of searching for industry. A fellow by the name of Bob Hutchins was a public service employee out of Plainfield. He was their development man. He was trying to pull businesses into their service area of PSI. And he would make trips to Japan and try and find companies. He joined that group and was a great help. He worked for PSI. I don't know how we got these guys freebies. But anyway, with that group working hard, in 72 days from the IBM closing, an announcement was made. Our first industry was coming, Shenandoah, signed on, and that was the first. So I'd like to also give a shout out to how we were working with local banks. I was one of a banker, so I'll admit that. But we had a very good relationship with First Citizens Bank, Central National Bank, and I was with First United Savings Bank. We worked together. We had friendly competition. We didn't cutthroat anybody. If a big deal came along for the community that was maybe too big for one of us to take all the risk and have all the money out, we get together. and we would try to participate that loan. And one I'll just mention and call on Bob Evans came about for what was known as the Opera House. What happened?
There was a major fire at the Opera House, which is on the west side of the square. And Jerry Warren was the mayor at the time, and the city attorney was a fellow named Jerry Calvert. And they immediately, after the fire was extinguished, and unfortunately there was a loss of life in that fire, they had the wrecking ball out in what is that, Jackson Street, ready to take the facade down. And a business partner of mine who was a contractor by the name of Frank Hutchison and the building was owned by Ross and Lois Ali. And I begged the mayor and Jerry Calvert to not take the front down. And then I went to Ross and Lois and said, we will secure that if you'll deed it over to us. So for $1, Frank and I bought that burned out building. Frank got with the engineer and got a crew in there and wired everything securely so the facade would not fall on traffic, which is what the mayor and the attorney were fearful of. So then, once it was secured, I was involved with Main Street, which was a fledgling operation. And Frank and I gave the building to Main Street, and then they redid it. But that's the story. My part of it. You can take it from there.
Well, the redoing had to be financed.
Yep.
It wasn't free. And so the three banks that I mentioned got together and took that loan and loaned the money to Main Street, who now we have the Opera House redone and so forth. So that's how we worked together in this community. That's how we reacted. It led to 4 years later, Mayor Mike, he called me 2 or 3 times through the years. Doggone you. So anyway, he called that he had been told by the state that Greencastle, Putnam County had a pretty good story to tell. And he thought we ought to apply to an All-American Community source, which we did. And we, again, formed a committee of 8 or 10 of us. We had 3 things that we put in our application. We had citizen involvement and participation in that recovery because we could have faced economic disaster. We had a 20%, I'm reading some figures here, of assessed valuation was gone. 40% of our jobs were gone. 70% of industrial payroll was gone. And we had worked to replace those. We had somebody sitting here who's a very good writer.
Ooh.
And he wrote that application for us. Eric Bernsey.
Yes, sir.
Eric, take a bow. Eric Bernsey was our writer of that application. DPU stepped in and we made a film.
Ken Bodie.
Ken Bodie was the director of the whatever. What was he called, Mike?
Oh, gosh.
Anyway, he was a national
Media
figure,
Center.
a national
Media
figure. The media center he was in charge of, a national figure from television and news, and came to Greencastle. We were fortunate to have him. Mayor Mike was a part of that, and we laughed about it at the time. But every time they interviewed Mike, he would say, "People make a difference in my hometown." So that was kind of what we were known as. We had a Main Street organization that applied for grants, and is Ken Idle here? Ken Idle led that. We had a grant to redo the downtown, sidewalks and curbs and storefront. We had grant money to do that. Grant money always takes a match of some kind, and I don't remember Mike, you might or might not, where the grant money came from, the match. And we had formed a group called Opportunity Housing, which we had seen a need for affordable, low-income type housing. So that was our three things. And we took those three things to San Antonio. There were 30 towns, large and small, that had applied. And because of our story of how we reacted to change, we did not sit down and say, oh my, this community got together and said, let's do something. And we were awarded, I guess 10. They awarded 10 out of 30. I don't mean to offend anybody. I've left out some names of people who worked awfully hard in that rebuilding. But it shows what a community can do with some effort. So thank you.
Good. Thanks, Bill. So taking it back to but for IBM, I like to reflect on but for IBM. IBM donated $1.7 million to the city when they left. Cash. Which we had to create the Citizens Advisory Committee for Industrial Development, CACFID. Because if we had just accepted that gift, it would have gone into the tax rate, which means we probably wouldn't have had collected any taxes that year. But we wanted to set that money aside, so that organization worked very closely with the city council. IBM donated the building, all of its buildings, and 240 acres of ground. I mean, think about that. That would not happen today. But IBM felt strongly that Greencastle had been a great plant, that there were great people living here and working here, and by God, we're going to do the right thing. And they did. So IBM at the time in '87 was the largest employer in Putnam County, 985 employees. IBM donated $2 to $3 million to Area 30 in supplies and equipment. I mean, think about that. In a county of our size, that kind of money, it's just unbelievable. And the Veterans Memorial Highway would not have been built but for IBM giving us that $1.7 million. So you have to do a 20% local match on the side from 231 over to Jackson Street. So we had to come up with 20% of the cost of that. Well, IBM was right there. We all talked about it. We had a big discussion. We decided that was a really good way to spend that money. That would have a huge impact on this community forever and ever. Well, 30 days before the construction started, I get a phone call from the Indiana Department of Transportation saying, we're going to issue a change order. We've decided that 9 inches of concrete is not thick enough. We need to have 10 inches of concrete because of Lone Star Cement. And I said, okay. And who's going to pay for that change order? Well, you have to. So again, but for IBM, I wouldn't have had the $300,000 for an inch more of concrete, $300,000. So, and the construction started and everything, and the work that Bob Albright had done and Jerry had done, and the councils before us and so on, all that came to fruition because IBM had treated this community just wonderfully. So now I want Bob to come back up here and talk about the Merrill Lynch relocation services, where IBM buys all of your houses when you. So Bob, have some fun with this one.
Well, among my other careers, I have been a realtor for a long, long time.
Here.
50-some years.
The mayor. All righty, we'll be louder.
Oh, louder?
Louder.
Okay. I've got two different tacks to take. One is the one Mike has referenced, and that is the real estate, because I was very active at that time. And IBM, as you employees know, offered a buyout. So if you moved to Mechanicsburg or Lexington, they would get 2 appraisals on your house. They would buy it, and they'd turn it over to the real estate industry to sell. They brought in at their expense a young woman from Merrill Lynch Real Estate, Marty Robbins, and she was a tough taskmaster. She would get these homes on her list, and I think ultimately it was around 400 homes that we ended up selling. They enlisted the support of every realtor in the county, and I think even some out of Clay County. So they would come into the house and look at it, and if it had Harvest Gold appliances, out. If it had shag carpet, carpet went out. If it had a blue countertop, that went out. And all the walls were painted beige. We used to call it Merrill Lynching a house. And the amazing thing was that in that next 2 years, all 400 of those homes were sold. They also brought in a consulting firm, public relations firm out of Connecticut. And they dreamed up this. Do you remember seeing that around town?
Oh, yeah.
And I remember talking to one of the gals from the PR firm. And she said, we will make Greencastle as well-known in central Indiana as McDonald's. And if you'll recall, they did. There were billboards up and down the interstate. We were on Terre Haute television. We were on Indianapolis television. And they marketed this community. And one of the things we found was that there were people living in Terre Haute or living in Indianapolis, couples, and one or the other had the job in the other town. So they were commuting, 80 miles? And they found they could live here in Greencastle, and each one cut their travel time in half. So that worked very smoothly. Now, the other thing that I want to thank IBM for is it was coincidental timing, but in 1985, a group of us got together and decided that we should have a community foundation. Now, that was foreign. Nobody knew what a foundation was all about. So we struggled and struggled and struggled, but we were in place when IBM left. And Lilly Endowment was very generous to our community in that they gave us a challenge grant of $1,700,000, ironically, the same amount IBM had given to the city. So this would have been probably early 90s. And I happened to be involved in the foundation heavily at that time as the president of it, and had been for 2 years. And I struggled around trying to raise money, pull it into the foundation. We got cemetery funds. We got the Moose Lodge had a little fund. We were just pulling anything we could get together. The challenge grant from Lilly Endowment stopped on January 1st. The CACFID group that Mike spoke of still had $700,000 in their fund. So on bended knee, I went to Mike and said, we need that
Yes, sir.
$700,000 in the foundation in order to meet the challenge from Lilly and get another $1,700,000. And bless his heart, he pulled it off. So that we got our first.
And it wasn't easy.
So our first challenge grant from Lilly Endowment was made by IBM money. And we can be thankful for that because the foundation, as you may or may not know today, believe it or not, in our little community of 38,000 population, has a permanent endowment of $43 million. $43 million.
Okay.
Who would have thought? Thank you, IBM.
Perfect. Perfect. You got anything else you want to talk about?
No, I,
Okay, so I think you can tell that it's a celebration of IBM. I mean, we are so blessed as a community that you all worked at IBM in Greencastle, Indiana. I mean, we're absolutely blessed. And we all know it. I mean, we reflected on it. Yeah, so thank you, IBM. And I think we've mentioned a lot of the different people, but what I found in my hometown is that, people step forward. And the IBM folks would be on the chamber board. They would be on the United Way. They would, anytime that they needed to be engaged with the community, all you'd have to do is call out to IBM and say, hey, we need somebody on the Main Street board. It's funny, I keep looking at Bill Dory, who has been the Main Street director. He's been the economic development director. He's been the mayor. So thank you, Bill, for all of your service. But anyway, so how are we doing on time? 2:00. Why don't we open it up? Are there any things that you think we should talk about today that we haven't talked about so far? Yes, Bill.
Well, I think to reiterate your comments about the people at IBM, when I landed here in '83, IBM really had a lot of their management people, a lot of their people in community organizations, and they were willing to share those management skills, those leadership skills with the community that helped really train a lot of people in the community on how to run organizations, how to manage not-for-profit things. I know Bob, on the community foundation, there were probably a couple of people from IBM when that got started. Did that start before?
It started before IBM closed. We started actually in 1985. So we were 2 years ahead of that. I don't recall any IBM people being involved in that initial board.
There were, IBM people on the United Way board, the
Yes.
district board, the chamber board,
Yes.
a lot of community organizations, a lot of churches and things like that. And that leadership that they help provide and provide that interaction in the community, I think really served the community well after the closing because people were used to that and had gained that extra information that helped the community be successful.
Perfect. Thanks, Mayor. Another thing, and Susie and I were reflecting on that. Our high school class in 1967, we just had our 55th class reunion. And our high school class was 167 students. I think now a class at Greencastle is 100. So, it's a lot less. And again, IBM and DePaul, all those kids were going to school in the Greencastle school system. So it had a huge positive impact. It was an absolutely wonderful place to grow up. Greencastle, Indiana during the IBM era. With DePaul and IBM here, it was just a very, very special place. So
Still is.
still is, absolutely. Yeah, still is. Okay, anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like for us to reflect on? Okay, Dwayne, you got anything else?
no, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I'll talk as loud as I can.
We hear you.
Thank all of you for coming out on a beautiful Saturday afternoon when I know you probably could have had other things to do. I was really glad to see so many people come out. A number of you I probably haven't seen since we had the last hot dog day.
Probably need to do another one. So, and then I think the other thing is all the changes that have occurred. Oh, yes, sir.
In another life, I was a staff member for Senator Richard Lugar.
Yes, you were.
And I'd like to give a perspective on a couple things that happened actually before IBM. And I think it was known IBM was not hiring new people for about 5 years before they left. Very seldom did they hire a new person. And I think it was Mace Aker told me that well before they left. And he said, you know, they hired maybe 1 or 2 people. And he said that was a sign of the economic situation, perhaps, with the company. But about 85, 86, we had a project. Bob Orr had become the ambassador to Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
And when he became ambassador to Singapore, he approached Senator Lugar and asked to create a book about Indiana that Bob Orr could give out, you know, to various companies and interests in Southeast Asia. And we had to raise some money up to do this. It was a private project, but we raised $150,000. But Dick Canvas was the first one we called. And IBM gave $10,000, just like that. And so that book was out there before 87. Okay. Now, I will tell you another thing that I don't think has been even in the press very much. IBM did a remarkable thing of not only providing the 3 years of United Way funding and all the funding they provided afterward, but when they made this announcement, every public office was contacted at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
They came to the governor's office. Congressman Myers, Senator Lugar, you know, we were all Senator Quayle at that time. Everybody got the same call at the same time with an IBM employee executive coming in, and they did it at the state offices and in DC. So you can imagine they must have had hundreds of people involved in that announcement. And they were doing that, in my opinion, to show how much they value Greencastle
Mm-hmm.
and the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a book that was written that they have here at the library. I don't know if you all are aware of this book. It's called Shock and Recovery, IBM Leaves Greencastle, and it was written by Ken Current. So this talks about, it's fascinating. Tony shared this with me. It has just, again, a lot of the pictures that you've seen are in here. They talk about their absolute love for Greencastle and wanting to do the right thing. And Ken gave this to Bob Albright, and it's addressed to Bob. And then they've turned it over here to have it. Again, I think it was really, I mean, I remember it was Veterans Day when the announcement happened. And so I was out at the Legion Hall for our annual dinner for Veterans Day. And it was like a morgue. I mean, it was people were just totally unsure of what was going to happen. Just, they had no idea what was going to happen. And they were afraid. You had local businesses worried about, would they even be able to stay in business? But I think, as you reflect on that, the community made a decision the very next day to go ahead and build the new middle school. Now think about that. Now you talk about courage. The people that were in that room, and I don't know who all it was, I don't know, you guys might know, but made a decision to go ahead and build the new middle school because we were going to come back strong. And boy, did it. My time as mayor, one of the most important things I did was try to keep the street sweeper getting the mud off the streets because we had so much construction going on. We had 2 batch plants, one building the new highway, one building the $1.4 million distribution center for Walmart. I mean, it was an absolute, to bring 7 new industries and then get them located here was just, it was just a dramatic time for our community. And again, with the open house that happened out at the fairgrounds, I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
The open house.
Yeah, the open house for the Merrill put on and had all the people come into the fairgrounds.
I don't remember. But I do have another thought.
Here we go.
I think one of the greatest legacies that IBM has left is probably sitting in this room. It's people. It's you people who worked at IBM, ingested the culture, the training, the skills, and the moral fiber that IBM produced. And you have been left behind by IBM, and we are benefiting by you being here.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It wasn't the fairground.
I got one quick little story. Most of you may have heard it, maybe not. Dave Kinney was site manager when the site closed. It was in November. It was snowing outside. Dave was in a restroom, standing at a urinal. Guy walks in beside him. Dave had been to Indianapolis, knew that the site was closing. The guy walks in beside him and says, "Well, are you going to close the plant?" And Dave thinks, "I've got to fire somebody because somebody has let this leak." Well, the guy that walked up beside him, maybe in this room, I don't know, walked up beside him, was talking about, "Are you going to close it because it's snowing outside?" But Dave already knew the site was going to close. He wasn't thinking about the snow. But that's part of the closing too.
Yeah, cool.
All right. So anything else? It's been a great celebration. Yes, sir.
Mike, I gotta leave momentarily, but the story comes. What role did Mike Harmless have run for mayor in 1988 if IBM had not closed in what, 1986?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not. No, this is really personal, but we had a family meeting. And with mom and dad and Tony. And I just really felt like my military background, having gone to West Point, that, I'm an engineer. I mean, it just seemed like that was what was going to be needed in Greencastle. So we had a family meeting, and Dad looked at me and said, "I think you've lost your mind." But he said, "If that's what you think needs to happen, then you go ahead and run." But no, I don't think I would have run for mayor, but for IBM choosing to leave. So yes, sir.
My understanding that you became, in effect, Greencastle's first full-time mayor. previous mayor, no question on that. They were sort of out of time.
Yeah, I think certainly the pay. Yeah, I think I was the first one that said I was going to be full-time, was in the office all the time. But I think Bob Albright was probably working full-time. You know, I mean, the meetings, all the stuff that was going on, I don't think he'd ever said that that's what he was going to do. But the mayor has to be, with something of this magnitude with IBM, Bob Albright had to visit with IBM executives, had to create the team, had to do all these things that had to be done, had to create CACFIT, and all of that in order to make sure that the city moved forward. Well, then, and as mayors, you have to find people you trust. And so, again, but for IBM, we created a tax increment financing district. That's all of that, everything out east. And all these new buildings and everything, the taxes that are being collected allows the mayor and the redevelopment commission to lengthen the runway on the airport. But for IBM, we wouldn't have an airport that lands small jets. I mean, they're just wouldn't have Crown. You know, because they wanted an airport that was going to land their jets. Walmart flies in from Bentonville, Arkansas on their jets. They get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, fly, land here, work all day at the plant, get back in the plant and go home to Bentonville and have dinner at home. It's a few years ago, this airport was the 11th busiest in the state. So, I mean, think about it again, but for IBM. That's my message today. And so I just think it's just important for us to constantly reflect on the value that you all have brought to this great community and how much we appreciate it. Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Good job.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
I have
Tony?
samples of some old IBM cards that Clyde Stringer brought, if anybody wants to come up and look at them. Different.
And you probably want to talk about this.
I do, actually. While I have you guys, let's do one more round of applause, both for these guys and for yourselves today, because thanks for coming in. Actually, rather touching and certainly insightful. I appreciate it. You know, also, I've lost my piece of paper, what I'm going to do. A couple of things. We do have, Caitlin made a walking tour. It's not what made a walking tour for us based off Mike's research. So do you want to say anything about this, Caitlin?
Oh, I was thinking that should be one of all their chairs, but we got, we got a few more here, and if you want one, then we'll run out and rent more.
Right. So if you didn't hear that,
We're just super grateful to Mike for all of his extensive research that went into.
so you can walk around Greencastle and just kind of walk through history with this. And then also, and up until 4 o'clock, we're going to have a photo identification program. If you guys want to, I have a lot of IBMers here. I'd love for you to stay and look at the photographs. And we're just going, and we'll walk you through that on how that works out. But that concludes our presentation for today. So thanks again, guys.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. Excellent. Excellent.
Did you also know that IBM started
Started what?
Federal Express?
Really? I didn't know that.